Hi, so welcome back to Foresight Paradigm. This is Quarantine Conversations number 10. I am speaking with Pedro Garcia and Jason Sylvester. Hi, gentlemen. How are you?
Good to see you. Thank you, London.
Good to see you.
I'm good. Thanks for having us
Excellent.
on.
Excellent. Now, Pedro is a believer, a Christian, and I wanted to get a believer on my podcast series because I haven't done that. And so it'll be an interesting conversation. The topic's going to be Christian history and morality. And I believe, Pedro, I somewhere heard you say that Christian history was a big part of why you became a Christian or some factor in there, which raised my eyebrow because I'm a big history guy and it's a key issue reason why I'm not a Christian
Yeah.
once I really started studying it.
Uh,
So, Pedro, do you want to kind of give us the rundown of why that convinced you or what you find convincing about it?
oh, definitely. So, first of all, thank you very much for having me in this conversation. As every time that I approach these type of conversations, I see them as a way to, of course, challenge each other in the search for truth. But I also see them as a way to make an example for others in a humble way, in terms of how actually we can approach these conversations in very healthy ways. So again, I'm very thankful for this conversation. So yeah, that was interesting. It is interesting because I'll be honest with you. I recently finished a very kind of intense overview of Christian history or what the Christian church has done throughout history, and definitely didn't surprise me at all because it's sometimes it's hard to read. It's definitely hard to read because it is very hard for me to recognize the words of Christ throughout history and what people have done with those words. At the same time, I would say there are many things that have happened because of these words and how those words have influenced people throughout history. But I would say something that really, when I was an atheist and I was reading about all of this, something that was very surprising to me, Landon and Jason, was that when I started reading about Western civilization and the beginning of Western philosophy with the pre-Socratics, and of course there could be something before that, of course, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, but when I read about the pre-Socratics and what happens in philosophy before Christ, and the search for virtue, and everything that was happening in those centuries as well in terms of history. I remember when I came to the Sermon on the Mount, and when I read it for the first time, I realized that to me, when I was reading it, I didn't understand this as a natural progression of what the conversation, or sorry, of where the conversation of virtue was leading. For me, it sounded more like a jump, like and kind of a revolutionary jump in terms of um, morals and in terms of the human understanding and the human value of life. So that is the whole premise for me. How actually Christianity in terms of history, like it suddenly appeared um, in history, kind of changed my perception of how these moral values were kind of ascended to a new level after I started to understand what Christ said, especially in the Gospel of Matthew and on the Sermon of the Mount. Definitely, in terms of what happens in the first three centuries and how the first Christianity, just to put it in that way, was kind of engaging with society and the Roman Empire and also the Greek virtue and Greek philosophy was also a very interesting interaction that I think it was kind of special in the way they understood goodness and the way they understood the way people should actually interact with others and actually with people that didn't actually prophesy or profess, sorry, that's the word, profess what they believe as well, you know? So in terms of history, what I mean also is that those first three centuries, especially of course with the appearance of Christianity and the Gospels, that kind of changed the course of history, and it did definitely. Now, in terms of what people did with the words of Christ, to be honest with you, it really doesn't surprise me that much because there's no system of thought that I have found that starts with a good premise that I really want to help people. I really see life in this way, and it doesn't end up doing bad things to people around them. So the common denominator of any system of thought or philosophical approximation to understanding of life, I just see people making mistakes upon understanding what they're stating. So, and I see this in many system of thought. So to be honest with you, it makes me sad when I read a little bit about Christian history, what people have done. It makes me sad too when the little I understand of communism, for example, and how beautiful it seems in paper. Then what happens in history is so different. So I can see common denominators on this. And for me, the final common denominator is the human heart. There's something that is wrong there. And I think the gospel should talk about it in very beautiful ways about what the problem is there. So that would be kind of the first approach to me.
Okay. I definitely agree with some of what you said there.
Mm.
Um, Definitely we can see, people doing bad things sometimes on based on a good foundation or good reasons across the board in a lot of human endeavors. But Jason, what do you have to say to that kind of portrait of Christian history that Pedro painted there?
Well, I mean, there's good and bad in everything. You don't have to be a member of any particular religion to be good or bad. Was it? I can't remember his name. Somebody says like to do good things, to do for a good person to do bad things takes religion. I think it was Victor Stenger.
Steven
But I'm
Weinberg,
not
he's a
sure.
physicist. Steven
Okay,
Weinberg. Yeah.
Steven Weinberg.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So,
Yep.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a typical sort of religious go-to that they claim that morality is somehow embedded in religion, and that's just not true. So there's plenty of examples of moral behavior predating the arising of modern, the agricultural age, um,
Yeah.
um, uh, religions. Sorry, trying to get my
Right.
brain engaged.
Right.
So it's a fallacy to claim that morality is tied to religion. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it is definitely a fallacy. It's something that I didn't actually mention, Jason, when I was stating it. I mean, for example, when approaching these conversations, many people think that secular humanists, for example, cannot be moral. I think that it's just a very silly argument. So I definitely agree with you. We're talking about the nature and the richness of the type of morality that we could actually end up talking about. So that's more, the conversation, not that people cannot be moral without religion. This kind of could be a different type of conversation, but and I know when it comes to talking about definitions and all these things, we could just it is a very interesting conversation though. I don't think I would call what Jesus was talking about as a religion per se, because he spent a lot of time talking and criticizing religious people in his era. So yeah.
Yeah. So what I think I'll do is I'll get my kind of rundown of Christian history and the reasons why I find it very unconvincing. And then we can kind of all get into the morality. What is Christian morality good? Why not? Is its foundations good? Where does what's a good source of morality? Things like that. So go back to the beginning of Christianity, right? We have Christians bickering and unable to agree on anything from the very start, really. You have, all these different sects. We even had sects like the Carpocratians. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they ritually swapped wives and did all kinds of crazy things. We had the Marcionites. They believed in many gods, at least two gods. We had the Gnostics. They believed like the world was all bad and that they believed there's two different gods, things of that nature. And of course, people bickered over the nature of Jesus for a long time, and blood was shed over that. You have Arianism and a lot of other things. And it seems like the reason what won out was completely political. You know, you had Constantine that became the first Roman emperor to really favor Christianity. He didn't outlaw other religions. That happened with Theodosius, who was like right after him, pretty much. And from that point, when Christianity got power, what did they do? They persecuted other Christians. They persecuted pagans. They tore down their temples. They repurposed them. Um, when they thought they had to, they incorporated pagan ideas into Christianity. Um, and that kind of seems to me is a story of Christianity in large part up until the Enlightenment, when Christianity started losing its power politically, and we had all these secular philosophers, the vast majority of whom were anti-Christian or at least very unorthodox Christians at the least. You know, they challenged it, and it started losing its power. And if you go back to the Enlightenment period, you know, people were still being burned for heresy. You know, we could go through the list: Inquisitions, Crusades, colonialism, slavery. And the thing is this a perversion of the Bible, or do they have? Is it based on a justifiable reading of Scripture? I think it's the latter, and I think it's demonstrably so. So it's not surprising if the Bible is a man-made document, right? That you have some good things in it, but you have a lot of bad things that we consider bad from looking at it from our perspective in modernity, you know, after the Enlightenment, right? So it's not surprising. You know what I mean? So you look at it and we identify the things in it that we like, and the criteria that we're using is from a post-Enlightenment modern viewpoint. A lot of things we find, that's why we can find all these horrible things in the Bible, right? Because we're viewing it from that perspective, and they didn't necessarily see it the same way we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so even the good things in the Bible, like the Sermon on the Mount, right? That's not original to Christianity. If you go back to Rabbi Hillel was a Jewish rabbi about 100 years before the time of Jesus, and he almost word for word said the same things. If you go back to the classical,
wasn't he after Jesus? He was like second
think,
century AD, was he not?
no, I think Rabbi Hillel was about 100 years before Jesus.
Okay, I
Yeah,
thought he was 100.
there were other ones after him. Yeah, I believe so. Pretty sure I have that right. But regardless, it's not about one person. I mean, these ideas go back. You can find them in Confucius. You can find them in Epictetus. You can find them in several different Greek philosophers. And the thing about the Greeks is, you know, they were not perfect, you know, but that's where we get our democracy, our political structure, republics, things like that. We don't get that from Christianity. The Bible does not argue at all for democracy or freedom of religion or freedom of anything. You know, it's really based on obedience. It's all about have faith and don't question. And questioning is the nature of science and philosophy, right? Not faith. You know, it's basically systematic doubt and skepticism. There's imagination in there too that you have to come up with, you know, hypotheses, but it's constrained by deep skepticism, you know, and testing. But so I look at all this and it's not, you know, it doesn't look good. Basically, it's a one long horror story, and it looks very man-made. It looks like the accidents of history, and much of Christianity was spread by force. I mean, that's just undeniable. So when you don't give anybody a chance, and you know you go to the Americas and you tear down their temples and you build a church on top of them, and you know you force people. That's a common theme I see, and you know. Look at a thing like hell, right? Something like hell is anathema to unity and to humanism. How can you base something on a foundation that says if you don't believe what I believe, believe? It's not even a voluntary thing, you know. If you don't believe what I believe, even if I don't know a good person just not believing something, they're going to burn forever. That is a recipe for persecution, division, and that's foundation. That's in the Bible. That's not a later invention like the Trinity. It's not really in the Bible. That's seems, you know, Jesus talks about gnashing of teeth and the lake of fire that never ends. And Bertrand Russell pointed this out 100 years ago. You know, this is a very defective moral teaching.
So Landon, if
So
you thank you for sharing all of that. Just
yeah, I mean
I
that's just an overview. I could get a much deeper into it, but
oh,
yeah,
I'm sure of it, and
yeah.
I'm sure you can continue definitely. But you have touched in so many topics, and some of them I'm having
Well, as
trouble.
I said, I was trying to give an overview of
No,
the
no, no.
nature. Yeah,
Definitely, that it is okay. But
yeah.
I just want to say for our viewers that some of the things that you have said, uh, you know, it would be nice to have time to talk about all of them. But
Go ahead, Pedro. Go ahead and pick on a couple things you wanna kind of call into question that I said.
well,
Well,
the
if I
thing is,
can just jump in quickly because you just mentioned Bertrand Russell. I
Yeah.
pulled up a quote of his. Is it when we first started talking? This jumped into my head, so I pulled it up. It's from "Can Religion Cure Our Troubles?" And he says, "But has Christianity, in fact, stood for a better morality than that of its rivals and opponents? I do not see how any honest student of history can maintain that this is the case. Christianity has been distinguished from other religions by its greater readiness for persecution. The whole contention that Christianity has had an elevating moral influence can only be maintained by wholesale ignoring or falsification of historical evidence."
so Jason, if I doubt that, what happens? Uh, is that if that is the source of your belief at this moment? If I doubt that claim, what does that say about my nature as a human being at this moment?
It doesn't say anything about your nature.
Oh, well,
Just
the quotes, it says that any honest, I think I'm going to paraphrase, any honest student of history that would doubt that claim that Bertrand Russell is stating, this would become, you know, I don't know, but, you know, like someone that you cannot trust or anything. So is does this mean, my question goes, if I doubt that claim that Bertrand Russell is making, what happens? I automatically becomes what he says I become.
well, and there's other scholars who've made similar points.
Mm,
That the term that I like to use is intellectual dishonesty.
mm-hmm.
So if a Christian is presented with the facts and they just disregard them, then they're not being intellectually honest. It
So,
doesn't conform to their worldview, and so they just discount it. So
so
there was another quote by Professor Giza Vermes from Oxford, who
yeah,
wrote in the Authentic Gospel of Jesus that if you look at the passage in Mark and Matthew where it says, "Don't cast your pearls before swine," well, the Gentiles were the swine, a sarcastic name for dogs. And he goes on to say, any thinking and honest, Christian should have, a thorough reevaluation of the fundamentals of their faith. And anything short of that is just being intellectually dishonest.
so let me ask you a question before we continue the conversation. So the nature of this conversation is going to be more like passing each other like these moral judgments, or we are we trying to kind of understand each other or just claim?
Pedro, I'm not judging you morally. I don't doubt that you're a great person,
No,
or
no,
at
no,
least a good
no.
person.
Of course, I'm not mentioning that, but it seems that like we're just quoting and doing all these things, and like we're going directly to intellectual dishonesty, and we haven't even started the conversation. Like it would be for the sake of the conversation to make it healthier. It would be better to just continue the conversation and see where we stand on all of this, because if not, just not for us, but for the people that watch these conversations, uh, people would end up, I kind of could end up mimicking conversations to
So
begin.
Pedro, what issues did you have with the history that I recounted? I know there are good things in the
Yeah.
Bible and that Christians have done and done because of the Bible, but this doesn't make it a good source if you have something that's full of so much barbarism with good stuff and contradictions. It doesn't make it a good source of morality. So what what did I say about the Christian history that you take issue with?
Well, Landon, allow me, if possible, because Jason said something very interesting that
Sure. Go, yeah, take
I,
it where you want to. Yeah.
I really want to, of course, answer your question. And I made some points here, Landon, definitely. But I wanted to talk to Jason because Jason said that when a religious person is presented with facts and they don't accept them, then they are committing, a fallacy of intellectual dishonesty. So my question is, because I really want to understand. So Jason, when you mean facts, what are the natures of these facts, and how do you approach them in a neutral perspective? Do you approach to those facts without any worldview?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last word.
Do you approach those facts, Jason, without any worldview? Do you approach facts as facts, or do you approach them with an underlying worldview or the way that you think the world is? It's truly a question.
I mean,
I really want to understand
I
that.
think that's the nature of anything. But the sources that I tend to read tend to be experts in their field, either historians, archaeologists, New Testament scholars.
Jason,
One
you
of them
mentioned the
is
Bible on Earth to me, and on our last, you were my last guest, and we
yeah,
talked about the Enlightenment versus Christianity, and you
right.
mentioned the Bible on Earth, and the Bible on Earth was by some Jewish scholars, right? And
Yeah,
they're
one
the
of them is an
ones that,
Israeli professor.
yeah, Finkelstein, Finkelstein, and University of Israel, yeah, and they established, there's no good evidence for the Exodus story and many other stories in the Bible, no good archaeological evidence. So I just wanted to mention that. So these are people that are actually honest, but they're religious, but they're good scholars. It's kind of like the Bible scholars that admit there's no good evidence for Moses or the patriarchs or the Gospels are not reliable. And they recognize, like in Genesis, we can see that this kind of like various authors that have been spliced together. They call them like the J author, the P author. I don't remember the letters
The
they ascribe.
It's the
Well, in Genesis, in
documentary
many parts,
hypothesis.
but I'm thinking of Genesis. So we get like the duplication in Genesis 1 and 2 that retells the creation story that contradicts it. And by the way, in the order that's contrary to science, like we have an Earth before light and things like that. But that's a different issue. But we can see that they call God by different names and they have like different styles and things like this. Some of these have been religious people that have, you know, documented this. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Honest scholars do report the evidence and can overcome that bias. And some of this evidence is so strong against Christianity for me and many people has been done by religious people. And if you
Yeah.
go back far enough, everybody was religious or at least claimed to be because they had to, or they'd be executed. So that's a good thing to remember too.
But think
Um,
about this. Honest people also killed 150 million people in secular history, only in the 20th century. But of course, if we focus the conversation there, then we won't get anywhere because we the three of us recognize that there are things that there are things that we can kind of, I would say, we can kind of say that they're good, but we have the potential as human beings to twist them. So if we focus the conversation just there, we're not going to get anywhere. And just going back to the question of Jason, Jason, I think you didn't answer my question. So when you approach you approach facts as you call them, do you approach with them with a certain worldview? And what worldview is that, if you don't mind me
Well, and
asking?
I think that's just normal for anybody that you
I know,
have
but I'm
sort of a
asking.
preconceived bias going into it. So yeah, but I will look at the scholarship and I will also look at the worldview of the scholar presenting it. So obviously, someone like William Lane Craig is going to come at a topic from a completely different angle from a Bart Ehrman or an Israel Finkelstein. So obviously, that their own worldviews are going to color their scholarship. So when you look at some of these, like these New Testament scholars, they spend their entire careers studying these things and they're looking at the facts. They're not necessarily coming at it with their own bias that this is true. And that was one of the points that Israel Finkelstein made in the book The Bible on Earth, that for 100 years biblical archaeology was wholly biased and one-sided, that these scholars up until about the 1960s were going out into the field, what they called it, the Bible in one hand and a spade in the other. And they had these completely preconceived notions of what they were going to find and went out digging up these sites trying to prove what the Bible said. And then they said, starting within the last 20, 30 years, archaeologists realized this was not a rigorous methodology. And they've gone back and they've had to reclassify a lot of these sites to say, hey, this obviously couldn't have been built by Solomon. This is 100 years after Solomon, and it's in a different region, and it's a different style. They can't force fit it into their narrative that they want it to be, and that is good scholarship. So they might have a worldview that, yes, there's some historical truth to this, but they're at least coming at it and trying to not necessarily disprove it, but to be open-minded enough to accept and adapt if they find that the findings don't match what they had originally thought.
That is very insightful, but it leads us to think that then when we talk about facts, we truly are not talking about facts, 100% facts, because we end up just looking at them and just malleably change them to the way we think the world should be. So that is a very interesting conversation, and of course, I don't have a lot of knowledge about this, and I don't have any problem to say that, but of course I'm sure you will find people in archaeology and all these things that you're finding, that people that would could keep on with the conversation, stating that they actually see that some of the things or these things actually happen in a way or another. So, but well, thank you for that, Jason. So going back to the question, Landon. So one of the things that and just tying a little bit with what we're talking about with facts and all of this. I mean, you focus a lot on the conversation about enlightenment, and I love the enlightenment. I really do. I really do. What happens there? People starting scrutinizing anything concerning supernaturalism, theism. People started to think about some more deistic terms, and at the same time, Landon, I don't see the Enlightenment as an attack to religion itself, more about what actually people were doing with religion. That's the way I see it more. And there's
So Pedro, I'm not a scholar.
oh no.
I'm not an expert, but I've read a lot about this. I have a small library about the Enlightenment, and I've done several podcasts with different organizations about it. It was definitely an attack on religion and what religion did.
Yeah.
And now a key thing that you said is that people basically perverted the words of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is,
For sure. I mean, that is.
Jesus never gave like the Greeks did, a nuanced philosophical defense of morality or anything else. He basically said, do this because God wants it, and it's based on authority, and it's really not based on the bettering of the world. It's based on the imminent end of the world. Many scholars think, Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher, and it's pretty clear he thought the world was ending. So it's really not the same as when we get to the Enlightenment. Jonathan Israel, who is one of my favorite Enlightenment scholars, he's a big scholar, and this is one of his books, huge book, obviously enormous book there, and it's part of a tetralogy about the Enlightenment. He traces the idea of human rights that we get, like the Declaration of the Rights of Man in 1789 in the French Revolution, before it was perverted by the coup d'état of Robespierre and Marat, who basically introduced authoritarian populism and kind of quashed all the rights stuff from the Rights of Man document. And also, by the way, Robespierre was basically a deist, and he hated atheists, and he's the one that reigned over the terror. People very often confabulate those events and think the terror was an outgrowth naturally of the rights of the principles of the revolution and the Enlightenment. Not at all. It was a they executed those people. So that's a key point. And I played the game. I don't know if you guys game at all. Probably not. I don't know. But there's a game called Assassin's Creed Unity that takes place in the French Revolution, and it has Robespierre walking around in the Festival of the Supreme Being saying, "I hate atheists, he's atheist," and that's very historically accurate. And so that's a key point I want to make, because you'll often hear these very spurious accusations about historical events like communism. Look what the atheists did, but they didn't do that based on atheism. They did that based on basically copying the worst aspects of traditional religion, like dogmatism and blindly following a leader, not being able to question things like that. And basically a political religion, basically. something like communism. And even the Nazis, they took the anti-Semitism that was long and well entrenched in society from Christianity, and they took hold of that. And many of those people were practicing Christians, and they had, God on our side on our belt buckle. And that's another point. I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but you guys have been talking a bit, and I have some thoughts I want to get out. So, God on our side, who was it? Dostoevsky, he said, if God doesn't exist, everything is permitted. But that's completely fallacious. If you think you have God on your side and God commanded it, God, then in your following orders of God, you can do anything. You disconnect yourself from the world and from your common humanity with other people, and you can justify anything with that.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and Dostoevsky was a committed Christian who thought the abandonment of Christianity would lead to nihilism. So he was
I think he was
definitely,
completely wrong about that. Yeah.
I think he wasn't, but let's keep talking about well,
Yeah, let's try to keep on topic history, and then we'll get into morality. But I
yeah
just had a couple side things I wanted to
yeah.
branch off into.
One thing I would say, because since as I touching on all those interesting topics, one thing that I realized about the biblical view of the world is that when you criticize the Bible, you can do it in two main ways. You can do it inside the narrative, or you can do it outside of the narrative. So when you see, for example, inside of the narrative, bad things happen, you need to take into account that that's the story. Whether you believe it or not, you think that is silly or it is true, that actually God created things.
So Pedro, again, I acknowledge.
Let me finish, Landon.
Go ahead.
Let me finish the thought. So, um, in the inside of the narrative, we know that everything starts as being good, and it was man that moved away from God. So that is inside of the narrative, and that changes a lot the way a person looks at the redemptive story of what happens there. And of course, it's also inside of the Bible, the final revelation of Christ and talking to people about love your enemies and pray for those who are cruel to you, so that you will become children of your Father who is in heaven. I mean, that is in direct opposition, and I agree with you with many of the things that you're saying. And for me, as an atheist in the past, it was interesting to realize that, again, there's no morality in the world. There's no system of thought that presents a moral system, not even secular humanism, and then applies it 100% to the letter. That means for me that there's a common denominator with human beings, which is there's
Yes.
something that was interesting to you when you heard me saying, when I say, yeah, I think humanity is broken in one way. So, yeah, criticizing the Bible from the outside of the narrative, it's incredibly easy. Oh yeah, so two bears and
But Pedro, I got to jump in here. Again, I acknowledge that people do all kinds of things and they don't necessarily follow from the documents or foundation they think they have.
Yeah.
But the problem, in big part, is the foundation with Christianity, with the document, with the Bible. It's
Mm-hmm.
history. A lot of it, a lot of the bad stuff follows naturally from what's in the Bible. And part of the problem is it's a bad foundation because it's full of contradictions. And it makes the claim that it's the word of God, but all the books that were people used to follow that were thrown out by political decision, all the additions and errors and all of that. It's a very human process. And the thing is, it looks like very much like a human process and a human creation. It's the point I made. And so if you have a foundation like that, it's not a good foundation.
It is
And
a
I think probably that's a good segue into the morality. What's a good foundation for morality, right? Um, Now, how do you want to do this, Pedro? You want to tell us what you think is a good foundation for
Mhm.
morality, and then we'll respond. Think,
Yeah.
I know you'll say the Bible and Christianity, but or God. But go ahead and explain why that's a good
Okay, so one of the things that surprised me a lot about the Bible, and one of the reasons why I became a follower of Christ, is because the Bible portrays humanity as it is. So all the characters you see them make the mistakes. It actually relates to me and who I am inside. It relates to many people that I know. It relates to many periods of history, people making mistakes, um, making doing bad things to people around them. So that is just something very special to me. And one of the things that I saw there is that definitely there's a human component in the writings of the Bible. Of course, there are people that finite beings and trying to understand the revelation of God on earth. Of course, I mean, it is natural for me to expect that there are going to be failures and people trying to understand all of this. So,
But Pedro, can I jump in here? The book claims it's the word of God, basically, or people think it's the word of God.
yeah,
So you seem to blame everything on humanity. But humanity, God created everything, and He knew how, how, giving your worldview.
yeah.
He knew its nature and he knew what humanity would do. He knew that He was creating a book that people would misinterpret and misuse. Doesn't a wise man speak clearly? If somebody has a very important message, don't they speak clearly? Instead of like, say I had a dad and I never saw my dad, but he left little cryptic messages on the refrigerator for me, and somehow I didn't put them all together. He had a torture chamber in the basement for me. Some people have this idea it's better not to be born at all because of the suffering in life. It might be better not to be born at all than to be born and go to hell. It'd be better not to be created or whatever if
Mhm.
that's going to be the case. So why not lay the blame on the supposed creator of everything that knew everything that would happen and created? And isn't that where the blame lies? I
Mhm.
mean, and the devil, you know what? Okay, God is God omnipotent and omniscient. Those two logically conflict, but accept that they're true. Um, isn't he? Doesn't he have dominion over the devil? He lets the devil do whatever he does.
So
I guess so. Why not place the blame there,
which one
and
of the
and say humanity has overcome a lot of stuff on its own without God helping them, and He created them this way. And the thing about, tell me, Pedro, how does a blood sacrifice, blood magic, solve anything logically? And people still go to hell. Also, is that a good image you want? Is that a good uplifting image, a blood sacrifice? I've seen people twist it to try to make it out to be, but it's why do you have to have a blood sacrifice? And what does that logically accomplish?
so
It doesn't seem to have accomplished anything because people still go to hell and all that. So go ahead, Pedro. I'm sorry. I just, like I said, I'll let you guys talk first because I have a lot of thoughts. Go ahead.
how could I go ahead after this, Landon? Because you mentioned like a lot of questions there, and
Right.
I don't seem to have kind of the time to acknowledge all
Well,
those.
okay, Pedro, that's fair. Pick what I said that most stood out to you that you want to respond to.
Yeah, it's when conversations are always good, but again, if when talking about this, we just present all this data and just throw all these bullet points, and then there's no time to
You're right. I've seen a lot of Christian apologists do that. They'll like in
what
debates, they'll keep.
about we talking about now, like us, like we're having a conversation. So if we really want for this to be a productive conversation, so and we
Yeah.
want to understand each other, then definitely.
So,
I'll,
Pedro, let me do it for you. Why not place the blame on God, who
okay.
created everything and knew how it would be? And why not place the blame there? Why say, God, it doesn't make sense. God created man sick and then commanded them to be well,
Okay,
or
that
say
is
they're broken. Isn't it better to say we're a product of natural, like science shows, natural processes, like everything, every phenomenon that we understand has had natural processes behind it. So why not? Isn't it a better hypothesis based on the evidence too that it's a natural process? And of course, we're not going to be angels, and we need government and things like that because we're animals with big brains. Than to say we're broken. So why do you not place the blame on God? Why is that a better hypothesis?
so
There's a God.
one thing that you're saying, Landon, that I really like, and something that I think it has been misunderstood about the relationship that humans are supposed to have with God, is that God cannot be scrutinized or doubted. The the whole name Israel is the one that struggles with God. So it is truly not a good thing when any ideology or religion, it doesn't matter, anything we're talking about, if it's forced upon and it doesn't leave room to doubt about it, I think we start with a wrong foot. So in terms of scrutinizing God and asking questions, that is definitely necessary. I would say I agree with you. Now, um, in terms of God knowing what everything that was going to happen and everything, the Genesis puts it sorry in a beautiful way. Meaning, if you want to have a relationship with beings that have a free will to love you back, then you need to have beings that are able to decide what they want to do with their lives. I know that, of course, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in God, it sounds crazy, but once you understand the whole prerogative of creating, then you can see that it's not difficult to understand. So the whole thing about creating is that he created God. I mean, that is the narrative too. So if we are going to scrutinize it, we should scrutinize everything that it says. So it starts as being incredibly good. So and then humanity.
Are you getting your idea that it's good to scrutinize God from the Bible? Because I really don't think you are. It
That
doesn't it say God, don't test God, and it's all about. I mean, it's all through the Bible. Have faith and obey.
yeah,
It even says like
cannot have
basically shun secular learning and
yeah, but you cannot have a relationship with a person because God is not a theory. He's a person. So you cannot have a relationship with a person without asking questions and doubting the things that he or she wants to do. So definitely, of course, the whole prerogative of this is that God created everything. So definitely, when it comes to having a relationship with a being of that source, the relationship analogically, we can understand a little bit of what we can know and learn from him by relationships that we, for example, the three of us as friends, we can have. But of course, the nature of this relationship must be different because he is the creator of everything. So, I mean, it's not, when talking about in these simple terms, it doesn't seem to me kind of the narratives is actually talking very well about what is happening with human hearts. So,
Pedro.
What makes you think that this being has any interest in us?
well, so that is a good
Is
question.
that not a very arrogant, self-centered point of view that this cosmic entity has nothing better to do than worry about what's going on, the minutia of our lives?
And Jason, to jump out that real quick, one thing that we've discovered, just a second, Pedro, just a
No,
second, please. One thing that we discovered through science is we continually have our central importance in the universe demoted over and over and over and over again. And we're not the center of anything. You
yeah.
know, I mean, I could go all the different scales, but we all already know that. So,
So, mhm.
that's very contrary to what a religious perspective and what religious people thought. They thought we were on the center stage performing for our master. And based on science, it couldn't be further from that, based on what, we can objectively identify anyway.
So what Jason said is very interesting. It is also the point that I've found that many people claim that can find purpose in a purposeless universe. So watching a perspective from this, it could be kind of understood in the same way. So now what you're saying about science, you guys mentioned science a little bit. I mean, science is such a clear picture of the fact that there is something going on beyond this. And I'll explain why I think this way. I mean, we have a brain, and the brain is a given. We have a universe, and the universe is a given. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves with a mind that can recognize mathematical patterns that are able to describe who we are and what we do, and also describe things that are going to happen in the universe in the future. Then also, when we talk about something that we describe, we actually only describing what we see. We haven't created it at all. And then the existence of a mechanism doesn't exclude the existence of an agent that put it in motion. And I'll concede the point, of course, that when we see a mechanism working, we we don't have to jump directly to the conclusion that there is an agent, an intelligent mind. That is my worldview. But definitely the fact that there are mathematical patterns and a reality that can be described, and we're not actually adding anything. The more that we get into this world, the more order we describe. I mean, that begs the question of why things are the way
But
they are.
but Pedro, I've heard people do it all the time. Christians do it. They say like because something is designed, therefore everything is designed. Because a man-made object is designed, therefore everything is designed, but it doesn't follow. I mean, that's a fallacy. Saying that nature is like a watch or a painting is simply a fallacy, and we've discovered that, through evolution, and all the evidence has corroborated it. And people do naturally have a tendency to, see patterns and seek agency in things, that helped us survive as far as we can tell, on an evolutionary perspective. Um, and people have a tendency, and we have for a long time, to anthropomorphize things and to say, I mean, I can see it very easily. People didn't know why things happened. They didn't have a systematic way to uncover their workings, why they happened. So what did they see? What could they use? What could they draw from? Other people, kings and people making things, and they project that onto the universe. But there's no reason to think that it doesn't even make sense. A mind came first, right? We don't know of any mind without a physical substrate, without a brain. As far as we can tell, like we know for hundreds of years, or at least 100 years, when you damage a part of the brain corresponding to like say facial recognition, or when people have Alzheimer's, and even when you get tired because you haven't had coffee, your consciousness is altered. Your brain, we understand a lot about the brain and the different functions it has in different areas. So it very much seems like, it is neurons firing as far as we can tell. We don't understand it completely, but everything we've uncovered about nature has had a natural, mindless cause behind it. That's kind of like the horse that's won every race. Why are you going to bet on another horse that's never won a single race? Um, we just have it's just in people's imaginations, as far as we can tell. They like to think that they're being taken care of, and that they project, the agency that they naturally detect and see around them. But you know, I didn't even mention we have many gods and many religions, and they all make similar claims. And you know, you don't impress them, they don't impress you, and you know, they
Happens.
can't all be right, they can't all be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens when, for example, when I go to the supermarkets and I see 30 tomato sauce brands, and definitely I'm going to like the flavor of one on top of the rest of the 29th. And we do this with politics as well. When we go and vote for someone, um, we're kind of claiming that the world should live the way we think it should live because of our votes. So we do this with politics. We do this with the way we understand life. We do it with everything. I don't think it is a bad thing to just have many options concerning what is going to happen
But
to us after we die.
right,
I think it's
Pedro, does it even make sense that a mind came first?
that
What was the mind? What was that mind doing for eternity? Was he just like, was he alone and bored and just like, twiddling his thumbs? What was he doing? You
that is
know,
the question.
oh, it
That is
doesn't make sense that a universe came first and minds are things that evolve in universes, as science shows. I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me that a mind would just be there, and a mind is way more complex than the universe. God is way more complex than the universe. Even if you want to say that it's not made of, constituent parts, like I've heard some apologists say, it's still more complex than the universe. If it can create a universe, it's more complex than a universe. Way more complex. And people say, well, God always existed, but why can't the universe be the thing that's always existed? And it seems to me everything we see in science seems to show a bottom up rather than a top down process. It's we over time we get complexity from simplicity. Um, and religious people, they constantly want to look outside of nature for the workings of nature. Just look to nature. I mean, you see the evidence of what nature can do? Why do you need to hypothesize something much, maybe infinitely more complex than nature to describe what nature is doing? It's never been needed so far. No theory or endeavor of science finds or needs God. Um, so how does that make sense to you, Pedro, that a mind came first?
so, Landon. Again, I mean, you asking a question and then you answer it for me. So again,
Well, I'm
seriously,
asking you again. I'm retracing my steps, and I'm asking you again.
yeah. So I mean, again, I don't know, but of course, I'm answering the question. So, um, the question of what the mind was doing and all of this, yeah, I cannot answer that question. I don't know that, so I cannot give you an answer. And people that claim to know an answer for that, they can have that answer if they want to. I don't think that there's an answer for that.
But it makes more sense to you that a mind came first rather than a universe.
Definitely, definitely, yes, it does.
I
So
I don't agree with that at all. It doesn't even make sense to me.
let me expand a little bit of this. You were saying, like, for example, when we see a mind, we see a body. For example, and correct me if I'm wrong, Landon. So, for example, consciousness could be a property that emerges from the body first. But it is interesting.
Seems to be, yeah.
Again, do we know what the body is? Because we actually objectively we don't know what that is. We're just describing what it is.
What a body is?
Meaning we know the matter is there, but
Yeah,
we don't,
well,
we don't know.
Pedro, the body's reduced to chemistry. Chemistry reduces to molecules,
Yeah.
which reduce to atoms. Atoms are interchangeable with energy. Energy could be eternal. The quantum foam could be eternal. Um,
And we don't
so
know.
it depends. I don't know what level you're asking that on. We know what they are, but we can always talk about how accurately do our senses perceive things. I guess because we do perceive things through our organs, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
um,
but we seem to perceive things accurately enough to be able to build civilization, right? So
so what I mean is that everything that you have just stated, Landon, once stated, when described, when we know what atoms do and what everything it does, we actually objectively we don't know what that is. We just we can talk about energy, and the only thing we can talk about energy is that we know what it does. We can put it there. It has been there. We know how it interacts. We're learning a lot about this, but we don't know what it is. So in terms of positing a mind that existed before matter, doesn't come as a shock when actually we realize that objectively we actually don't know the things intrinsically that we're talking about. So it doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry. So what I mean to say is that it makes sense to me.
it's fine. I said it didn't make sense to me either
No.
on my from my perspective.
So it makes sense. This is what I mean. It makes sense to me
Right.
that if there's in the known universe, and there's a lot yet to discover, in the known
Right.
universe, we know that there is a being as special as us, with a mind, with abstract thoughts.
Do we know how special we are though? We don't have any universes to compare ours to. I mean, I have a blog that talks about why is there something rather than nothing. Jason actually posted it on but
You
you
just don't
know, do we know how special we are really? Carbon is very common.
know,
I mean,
but
I think we're special, yes, but we don't really know how special we are. We don't know what other universes there are. That's just a point worth considering.
yeah, definitely. But please, Landon, if it's possible, would you let me finish? Like I haven't, I think since we started this conversation, I haven't been able to finish just one thought. I know that all your thoughts and objections are very interesting. I would like to talk about them, but well, if you cut me in the middle of saying that, then just going back to it is going to be difficult, you know. So, what do you want me to talk about now? What's your next question? What would you
Yeah,
like?
the second half of the basically the podcast was going to be on morality, and
Mm-hmm.
we kind of touched on it. But so just briefly sum up what you think is the foundation of morality, and why it's a good foundation, basically. You've kind of done that a little bit, but just kind of sum it up, you know, in a brief summary. The foundation of morality and why it's the foundation of morality.
So, one thought first about this the morality question. I find it as difficult for a secular thinker as the problem of evil is for a Christian thinker. So I'm excited to talk about morality because I think this is a very interesting question, and not in terms of the answer, but easy on the terms of in terms of, you know, when thinking about an external agent with a perfect morality from which we kind of understand how to behave. um, it starts with a good, you know, with a good step into the understanding of it. My worldview, especially, and Landon and Jason, is very interesting because in my worldview, God became a human and lived as a human being so that we could understand the way this morality works, not abstractly or conceptually only, but also in the way that it works in when we treat people and everything. And uh, adding to the, of course, to for me, incredible Sermon of the Mount, we knew how much value Jesus brought to the meek, to the weak, to the poor, and how he redefined leadership through servanthood, and how he brought intrinsic value to all human lives. I think that is an incredible step towards a good understanding for morality. So for me, more than Christianity, the main core is the life of Christ on earth.
Okay.
Thank you for
So
letting
I'll let Jason talk in a second, and then I'll kind of give a brief summary of my foundation. Then we can all, I guess, with this last part of the podcast, kind of discuss it. So for me, the foundation of morality is us. We're we're an interdependent and interconnected social species, and we have to live together. Um, we have many commonalities. We have a common humanity. Uh, we can look at the evidence of history, and even now, look at North Korea and South Korea, and look at them at night from space and see which one is lit up and which one is completely dark.
you.
We can see what we can look at what leads to flourishing. And people can always say, why should I care about flourishing? Why should I care about well-being? Well, because you're a human being, and most people do, and it's in their nature. Um, so when you say there's something above nature and there's like an authority, I don't see how you can say authority is morality at all. Um, you know, it's just not a good foundation. We need a reason. If you say God is divine command, well, does God have good reasons for his commands? If he doesn't, why on earth should we care? If our parents are awful, they gave birth to us, but we shouldn't listen to them. Um, Government, we don't just follow the government because it's the government and it made commands. We follow it because it makes sense, ideally anyway, because it's beneficial, and we try to change them if they're not beneficial. Um, so yeah, I had more to say, but I lost my train of thought. But yeah, that's the basic gist of it. Um, so we need good reasons, and if God does have good reasons for His commands, why do we need the middleman? We go to the reasons. The reasons are there, right? So, yeah, and this kind of ties into the Euthyphro dilemma of Plato that he put in the mouth of Socrates, which was not exactly about morality; it was about piety, but it's a good approximation. But Jason, what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, well, I concur with you on that point that we are a social species, and therefore morality is nothing more than what is good for a tribe to get along. And obviously that predates organized religion. I mean, that comes back down from when we climbed down out of the trees. And
Still
the
seeing
religions
some
we
animals,
have,
yeah.
the religion we have today are all products of the agricultural revolution. And that was what, 12,000 years ago? And yet we climbed down out of the trees 200,000 years ago. So morality is many orders of magnitude older than our current established religions. But I want to go back to 2 points that you made, Pedro, that
Yeah.
you made two points that I take issue with. One, you said that God needed to come down to understand our morality. Well, if God is omniscient, why would he need to do that? And two, the fact that Jesus was made God did not happen until like several generations after he was actually lived and died. So that was a completely Greek anthropomorphization that got layered on top of the apocalyptic preacher.
Mm.
So
So, thank you for that, Jason. So I think I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that, but I definitely didn't mean to say. I think I didn't say that God had to become a human in order to understand morality. What I meant, Jason, is that God became a human in order for us to understand the precepts, the moral foundation of the moral character of God. That's what I meant. And then what this claim of Jesus, people thinking that Jesus wasn't God when he was alive. I mean, the whole Gospels and the letters of Paul are full of,
no,
and
they don't.
they
You need to reread them because the Synoptic Gospels do not make that claim. That is a claim that is in John, that is wholly Greek.
so when since you're interested in this conversation, when Jesus says, for example, in the Sermon of the Mount, you have heard that this was said, and then he says, but now I say this to you, and he's equating himself with the law. I mean, that is, he's talking himself as at the same level of God. So that's actually the reason why they killed him. So and trust me, Jason, I read them. I try to read them every day to make sure that what I believe is actually true. So definitely in
You're
Islamic
speculating. That's why
doctrine,
they killed him.
you can find many instances where Jesus actually calls himself God. I mean, that's another conversation if you
And
want to
Pedro,
read.
you mentioned to me in a discussion that we had, I think yesterday on Facebook, about the Enlightenment, that it didn't just, there were things that preceded it. It didn't just start everything over. Well, it did start many things. It abolished many bad things that had endured for a long, long, long time that Christianity ruled over, during the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and beyond. But also about Christianity, it didn't start from nothing. I didn't even get into how we have all these dying and rising gods and all these, eating the body of the god and all these things that took place in pagan antiquity, and especially in the Hellenistic world, all around the Mediterranean, exactly where Christianity was and where it arose. I didn't even get into all that. But a lot of people, scholars point out, like the idea of the eternal soul comes from Plato, and the Christians adopted that, and they adapted a lot of things from Greek culture and philosophy, because the return didn't happen, Jesus didn't come back, and time went on, and they needed to adapt things. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages, he basically turned Aristotle into a Christian authority, and we had scholasticism, and that made every learning extremely, it advances extremely difficult. It was extremely dogmatic. Um, I don't know how Aquinas did that, and he has awful proofs for God that Richard Dawkins debunked in the God Delusion very well, and many other people have. But Christianity didn't come out of nothing, and there was a lot of things there, the mythology and otherwise, that ethically too. We mentioned the ethical part of it. That's something that I mean, do you deny that?
No, actually, may I answer to that point, Landon?
Yeah.
So
All right.
definitely, for example, the Sermon of the Mount, you can root it in history, in the wisdom literature that was happening in the 400 years before Christ, in the Jewish rabbinical literature, and you can
Right.
also see some of the terminology that the Greeks were using about in terms of virtue. I mean, for example, the Gospel of John, you can find
The logos.
the logos, which
Yep.
come directly from Heraclitus. And I'm not sure if that term of the logos was used before, but I remember that Heraclitus was using it as well. So definitely, London, Christianity is not something that, I mean, it doesn't come out of nothing.
Right.
It is birthed out of culture, out of people living life. Now, at the same time, and this ties up beautifully with the first point that I was making, is that I think at the same time that the Christian message, and with this I always need to make the distinction because it was hard for me when I was becoming a follower of Christ too. The Christian message is not what people have done with the message, but the message itself. And in what people have done with the message, I could include myself into it as well because I'm people too. The Christian message means to me kind of a not means not kind of a progression of morals, but there's a huge jump there. And of course, it is a fulfillment. It brings fulfillment to all the law and the prophets in eschatological mode of the kingdom of heaven is happening right now, and this is the way a child of God is supposed to behave on earth, but not because because of this you get that. It's because this is the way to achieve human flourishing. So definitely, definitely, it comes out of the culture in which it's said. But there's a
But
jump there for me.
Pedro, if God created all this plan, and he not every Christian agrees, but a lot of them think that God is like, they believe in providence. They believe that God is stewarding things and guiding things, but look at the disaster of Christian history. I mean, God is stewarding that. And look at the fact that as we've gotten more secular, we've gotten more rights, things have gotten
More
way less
peaceful.
violent. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Steven Pinker, but he and other people document this extensively with mountains of graphs and data. And we can look around and see it, and look at the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, right? So they couldn't have started that with like an invocation to Jesus, right? You have what you had to appeal to is secular humanism, as instituted by the Enlightenment, which is basically just what I articulated are our common humanity, because we they had people, even non-Western countries agreed to that, and they people that were Muslims and all kinds of things, and what could they find in common? Our common humanity. It's beyond our dogmas, that are, for a certain place, parochial dogmas and all that. So I found a really good passage kind of articulating my position on the foundation of morality by Richard Carrier. He's a historian and a philosopher. Uh, so he says, as human beings, we all share the same primary biological desires, which are not limited to the so-called desires for, say, food and sex, but include, as science has demonstrated, desires for love and companionship and joy and fulfillment, and more, ordered in similar hierarchies of ultimate and instrumental necessity. And only such desires can ever rationally entail, in conjunction with knowledge, an informed conclusion about what we most want. It follows that we will all, when rational and equally informed, desire most the very same things, when in the same circumstances, which logically entails that the same moral facts will be true for all of us. Therefore, universal moral facts must necessarily exist. And he also says, just kind of talking briefly about why Christianity is not really a good foundation, if I can find that here. 1 second. Oh, I had it bookmarked. Where'd it go? Oh no.
Well, while you look for that, let me quote A.C. Grayling, who was talking about when atheists, when the religious people, the Catholics ruled the world, they burned us at the stake. All we're doing is asking some questions, and you guys are getting all flustered.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. We should look at what religion did, and I've kind of mentioned this, but look what it did when it had control, when it had power, and really thought it had God on its side, and people fully believed in the Bible. It wasn't
Well,
good for many people.
we don't even need to look at history. We can look at right now. Look at every single theocratic state today, and what a disaster it is.
Yeah, it's not just Christianity. It is that. I mean, especially monotheism. Like I said, it's inherently exclusionary, and it's anathema to unity. I mean, again, if you have something like hell, how could it not be? And the Muslims have this too, obviously, and uh, I can't even get past that.
Oh, he's gone.
I guess he was done. He didn't like the conversation, I guess.
I don't think he would have been rude enough to just hang up. I think maybe he might have been disconnected. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt.
Disconnected there. I can see if I can.
Oh, there he is.
What happened?
I don't know, man. You left.
I really don't know.
You disappeared.
I don't know what happened, but
well, I'm glad you didn't just hang up because you were mad, Pedro. That's good to know.
Yeah, no. I'm having trouble to follow with this conversation. You guys are mentioning very interesting things and many interesting points, but the conversation is gearing towards just scrutinizing, which is okay, by the way, scrutinizing Christianity with as many points as possible instead of just developing one and talking about it truly. So if you allow me to do this land grant, since scrutinizing Christianity is actually very easy because it's there, it's written, and you can go and scrutinize it. Would it be okay to talk about morality in terms of well-being and what does that mean and how? Now let's talk about that type.
Pedro, I kind of already discussed that, and I just gave you a quote about it. Let me read this passage real quick about why Christianity is not a great foundation. So, threats of hell and bribery of heaven stunt moral growth by ensuring believers remain emotional. And I don't mean that I'm reading this. I kind of concur with it, but I'm not trying to be offensive. So motivations of such as threats of hell and bribery of heaven, stunt moral growth by ensuring believers remain emotional children, never achieving the cognitive moral development of actual adults. Psychologists have established that mature adults are not moral because of bare threats and bribes, but because they care about the effects their behavior has on themselves and others, and who find their reward in exactly that realization. In other words, mature adults are good because they are good people, and being such, they don't need religion to convince them to be good. Being good is what they already were, what they already want to be. In contrast, naive Christianity is a perfect vehicle for manipulating masses of people towards any wicked end for which a Christian purpose can be conceived. The Holocaust, the Inquisition, antebellum slavery, and the genocide of American Indians are the most notorious examples. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of
It is interesting
building
that
up what I already said about.
the quotes instead of saying Christianity, it says naive Christianity. That says a lot about
Yeah.
the author. But
Well, there are definitely, like I mentioned, there are scholars that are Christians and they're able to, be honest about what the evidence says.
oh, that is good. That is definitely good and necessary always. Yeah.
Yeah.
So um, I guess that I still have the question that is not going to be answered for me with only one quote. What do you guys think about secular morality and where it could take us? Just to come up with some data, which is, I mean, you guys have done that a lot. I, you guys know what happened in the 20th century, and that doesn't say anything, for me at least, about atheism. By the way, I don't do that in
Well,
conversation.
Pedro, I've kind of discussed all of that already. Not in a lot of detail, but I've gone over it. So communism was not people did not commit atrocities based on atheism. Atheism is not a doctrine that motivated them to commit atrocities. It was political dogma that was basically political religion that copied a lot of the worst parts of Christianity. It just people didn't say I'm an atheist, so I'm going to go kill people. It didn't really work that way. Christianity is different though in other religions because you can find in their holy books that are mandated or created by God explicit sanction for the things that they've done. So you can't really say that it's a perversion. You might think it is, but it might be a perversion of certain parts of the Bible, like the best parts, but it's not a perversion of the whole thing. So,
Yeah, what I
but
was saying, Landon, is that when I talk about those figures, I'm not saying that atheists are bad people or anything like that. That is what I'm just saying. But this is just we have this as evidence also. Like these states, we know that they didn't have God or any religion. The fact that you analogically built a case to get some of the instances from religion as to how everything was copied, that is okay, but we know that those states, like 150 million people died because
right, but they were political systems. They were political dogma, political religion, basically.
yeah.
I mean,
So
and again, they did copy. I've read a lot about this too. They did copy a lot of things from traditional religion. And Joseph Stalin, he was trained in seminary. He knew how to manipulate people. He knew how to, a populism, authoritarian populism copies this too. It gets into people's emotions and gets them riled up and gets them, it manipulates them and appeals to their base fears and desires, like not wanting to die and feeling like you're righteous and uh, all of these psychological things. But about as far as secular morality, I've kind of already laid that out, haven't I? If you can ask more about that if you'd like, but I told you
Well,
it's based on
if
our
I can chime,
nature. It's okay.
if I can chime in on this communist, fallacy again, the fact that these communist states were atheist was secondary. The atrocities that were committed by communism had nothing to do with the atheism. The fact that they were atheist states was because they didn't like the competition. This was a one-stop shop. It's like the CCP in China. It begins and ends with them. They don't like competition, and religious ideology is a competitor to a communist ideology, and that's why they suppressed religion.
so therefore, for you guys, just to get to the point, anything that Christianity has done is horrible, and
No,
anything that came from
I
the
never said that. I
no,
explicitly said the opposite, actually.
I'm asking. That's why I'm asking a question. I'm
Okay.
asking a question. So because that's what I'm trying to get. I stopped being kind of the like the interviewed. I really want to understand what you guys want to, what's the purpose of the conversation and everything, because I really want to learn about all of this. So, what would be for you guys the final statement of something that people could take away from this conversation in terms of morals and in terms of all of this? I know you have stated, but just for the sake of the conversation, in case that we have another one, because I really hope that we have another one in the future.
Sure. I mean, I think that. Go ahead.
I think for me, it goes back to the quote from Bertrand Russell that claiming that Christianity is a moral religion is just a wholesale ignoring of the facts. And the historical facts of the last 2,000 years are that this was not a very moral religion. Yes, it has moral tenets to it, charity and loving kindness for your neighbor, but when it gets into the hands of the policymakers, like you see it in the US with the evangelicals who are constantly trying to take control of school systems and denying gays' rights and denying women's rights. When you put religious dogma into the hands of the politicians, it's just dangerous.
I would say I would agree with that, but I would make the further point that I made already that it's also the religion itself. It's also foundational. It's not just people manipulating things. It is that, but there's also a lot of problems with the religion itself, with its principles and its holy books. And I've already pointed that out a few times, although we haven't really gone too much in depth into that. But I would also say, just it's good to have conversations with people that don't think like you, so you're not in a bubble and challenge your beliefs. And I definitely think that's a good thing to do. And I think people might be able to, find that useful to recognize that principle and why it's valid. And you know, we haven't got into everything necessarily like you asked me about what is secular morality or why, and I kind of already told you that. So I'm wondering if you heard me. Uh, but I'll repeat it briefly again. I read a passage about it.
I think we don't have. So something we could do, Landon, is I would love to have you guys, or if you want to, Jason too. I would like to have you for Ask and Wonder, the show, and we can actually do a deconstruction as we did today concerning Christianity and morality. We could do the same for secular morality. So definitely
Okay.
it would be an interesting question. And the reason, Landon, I'm saying no is because there are many points I would like to talk about. You kind of stated what the secular morality is, but then the way we got there, the foundational beliefs of it, and then where that secular morality could take us, I think hasn't been touched in the conversation. But one thing I would like to say too is that first of all, just emphasize what you said, Landon. Conversations, please. The more, the better. People think that we cannot have conversations about these things, and this is actually something that is very dangerous for any society. When we stop having conversations, man, it is just truly bad. And my takeaway from this conversation is that I loved hearing your criticisms about Christianity. With some of them, I agree. Definitely, Christianity has done horrible things in the world, as any system of thoughts that have existed in the world. And that's why I don't follow Christianity. That's why I follow Jesus Christ. So thank you very much for having me today in the show.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Pedro and Jason. It's been fun. It's been interesting. It's been longer than my other podcasts actually. So we could have gone longer. So yeah,
Yes. And
definitely.
we'll do one with Ask and Wonder if you guys want to, okay?
Sure. Sounds fun. All right, guys, take care.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for being on.
Bye.